The following is rated not safe for work. It contains strong language, adult situations, and lots of spoilers. Discretion is advised.
In the criminal justice system, cinematic-based offenses are considered especially heinous. The dedicated attorneys who investigate these villainous films are members of an elite squad known as the Reels of Justice. These are their stories.
Order, please, order. The Reels of Justice is now in session. Judge Big Ben Haslar presiding. Your eyes for the Honorable Judge Haslar. Be seated. Welcome to the Reels of Justice! Today we are hearing the case of The People versus Bordello of Blood, a 1996 horror comedy movie that follows a private detective as he investigates a brothel run by vampires. For those of you unfamiliar with our court proceedings, we are here to determine if this film is guilty of being a bad movie. As always in this courtroom, films are being considered excellent until proven awful, and the burden of proof lies upon the prosecution to prove beyond the shadow of reasonable doubt that this film is guilty. Mr. Jason Stein, you are appearing on behalf of the prosecution. You may present your opening statement.
Your Honor, members of the jury, following the success of Tales from the Crypt Demon Knights, and with the ongoing success of the Tales from the Crypt show, producers Alan Katz and Gil Adler wrote a script for the next Tales from the Crypt movie to be called Dead Easy. It was a ghost story set in New Orleans. They were in the middle of pre-production when the cable was pulled to make a whole different movie called Bordello of Blood, based on a script by Robert Zemeckis and Bob Gale when they were in college. Why the change? Universal had bought the script, so Robert Zemeckis would not bolt for DreamWorks. And since Universal spent time and money on this script, they wanted to return on their investment. So they dumped it on the Tales from the Crypt team. To make matters worse, they barely had time to rewrite it and do a proper pre-production. They were forced to move production to Vancouver as a slight to the American film unions. Then they were mandated to cast Dennis Miller as the hero and pay him way more than his worth at the time, and cast a supermodel as the main villain. Today, I will show that this disastrous experience led to a subpar movie that critically flopped financially and ruined many personal and working relationships.
Thank you, Mr. Stein. I, too, am paid way more than I'm worth at the time, which is nothing. Mr. Maynard, you may present your opening statement.
Thank you, your horror. Good evening, boils and ghouls. It is I, your intellectually distinct master of ceremonies for the evening, the Scaretaker. Intellectually distinct from any other copyrighted protected entities you might be familiar with, and definitely different from that faker we heard earlier. Now, it's my understanding that some people have made the grave mistake of saying that Bordello of Blood sucks, or maybe that it bites. They both sound good to me. But I'm here to assure you the only thing guilty about our film here today is its pleasure. You know, this movie reminded me of an old ghoul friend of mine. She was an exotic dancer, and for the right price, she'd strip right down to her bones. Yes, you could say she had a certain appeal. But back to today's film. I thought it was a scream come true. Dennis Miller knows just how to knock 'em dead. And as for the lovely ladies, well, they were all doing the best they could. But seriously, they really make me eat my heart out. So, sit back and relax, because our defense counsel may be a real pain in the neck. But here's some points that will really make your head spin.
Thank you, Mr. Copy of a Copy.
No, that's an intellectually distinct character, Your Honor. It's the Scaretaker. Completely different.
Does not remind me of anyone, absolutely.
No, the Crypt Keeper is a host of Tales from the Crypt, and the Scaretaker's between jobs right now.
Mr. Stein, you may proceed with your first exhibit. I believe you had a witness you wanted to call, but the bailiff is on a smoking break, so please swear on the witness yourself.
Okay. I call to the stand to bear witness Mr. Gilbert Adler. Will you please repeat after me? I, Gil Adler,
I, Gil Adler,
do solemnly swear
do solemnly swear.
that I will tell the whole truth and nothing but the truth.
Well, we will try for that.
Will the witness please follow the instructions?
Absolutely.
Okay. For the record, please state your role in making the movie known as Bordello of Blood.
Do I have to?
For the purposes of this court,
Well, I co-wrote it. I produced it. I directed it.
thank you.
I'm not Dennis Miller, though. I wasn't in it.
Were you of sound mind and body at the time of making this movie?
Clearly, that's in question. I've oftentimes asked myself that very question. I think the court will determine that.
Okay.
And I will abide by whatever they suggest I do, which I haven't done before or yet.
Why start now? Okay. Can you briefly summarize, the issues that occurred during the making of this movie?
Yes. My pain, my pain, my pain. Whether it be the co-writing with Alan Katz, the directing, or the producing of it from the get-go. It was a movie that, if you've listened to the podcast, How Not to Make a Movie, little plug there, you probably know that we made the movie for all the wrong reasons.
And what reasons were those?
Oh, well, we were making another movie in New Orleans when the authorities at Universal decided in their infinite wisdom that there was another movie, Bordello of Blood, that they would rather make instead of Dead Easy. We should have said, no, goodbye, good luck, run for the hills. We didn't. We said, well, we really want to make a movie. It's a studio movie. It's a decent budget. Let's try. Little did we know that decent budget would be reduced when they decided to pay some actors in it more money than they deserved or their market value. Little did we know that the production would have to go into production and start shooting in 3 weeks, which meant we needed to rewrite the script and go to location and find locations and prep the movie in 3 weeks. So as you can see, from any aspect you look at this, it was clearly a wrong decision to say, yeah, let's go ahead and do this.
And how long do you usually take on pre-production for a movie of this size?
I would say 4 to 6 weeks.
4 to 6 weeks.
Mm.
Okay. And what were the ramifications of the making of this movie?
I aged rapidly thereafter. You can tell by seeing this video, I'm 26 years old. And look what's happened to me. It didn't, thank God, it didn't cancel our collective careers, but it came pretty close to destroying a lot of our careers.
Would you say there were setbacks?
Setbacks would be kind.
And in your opinion, as a filmmaker, what is your opinion of the final product?
It's sad. It's sad. It doesn't really deliver on any of the Tales from the Crypt-ish areas that we thought it would. I've only watched it when we first delivered the movie. I watched it again on its 25th anniversary because they had an invitational thing in Vancouver and they sold out because they heard I would appear. So I figured, well, am I going to have to wear a rotten egg free gown? Are they going to be throwing eggs at me? And I apologized before the movie started for the movie and said, look, if at the end of this movie, if you don't want to ask me questions and you just want to go home, I understand. And I was there for over an hour and a half answering questions. And then when I left, they asked me to sign CDs and posters and on and on. There's a huge following for the movie, which is to this day, astounds me.
Do you believe that this movie should be thrown into the pits of hell?
I thought it already had been.
Hell on Reels is not yet.
Will the witness please answer the question?
Do I think it should be? I did. I thought it had been. And in fact, I thought I had been attached to it.
So without leading the witness, do you believe the film is already there?
Oh, yeah, it has been for a long time.
Okay. Well, we would like to thank the witness for his testimony in this pressing matter, and you are now dismissed.
Well, I can just say to the jury, please be kind. We've suffered enough. Please.
Very fair words. Oh, wow. And look at him take off. He's going. I guess we can't have any
Hey,
cross-examination.
When do I get to cross-examine here?
No, he's fast. Look at that car go.
Wow.
Understandable.
Fast for a 26-year-old.
Wow, yeah. So no cross-examination, I'm afraid. But do you have another exhibit, Mr. Stein?
Well, Your Honor, I would like to rebut just a couple of those points.
Sure,
One,
absolutely.
I would like to point out to the jury that a ton of people did show up for the 25th anniversary screening, as Mr. Adler said.
Define a ton. Do you know?
They said 25th anniversary.
No. How many people showed up?
A sold-out theater. I don't know. That's enough people.
A sold-out Canadian theater, and also people showed up on January 6th as an event. So just because people showed up doesn't mean they were right.
Canadian theaters are actually fairly large because it's metric, Your Honor, so it's very deceiving.
We're not going to do that conversion. Yeah, no, I don't want to do that.
But I would like to say I feel for Gil here. This was his first feature film. He did get a difficult star to work with in Miller. And I understand that in that situation, it was challenging. It was overwhelming. He was actually filming another movie in London, I think. Or it was maybe it was TV stuff. And he had to fly back.
Yeah, they were doing the Tales from the Crypt. The show had moved to London for production. So he was moved in post-production. He was going from LA with doing post-production to England to do Tales from the Crypt and back and forth.
Yeah, and to Canada, where a lot of Bordello was shot in Canada, wasn't it? To get rid of the unions.
And that was before Canada had been like the place to go for production.
Mm-hmm. And so he didn't have most of the Tales from the Crypt crew that he trusted well. It was a lot of Canadians that he did not know and didn't trust well. So, so I understand he had a lot of challenges. And I think with that kind of overwhelming experience, one doesn't look back upon it fondly. But that's what makes this movie even more impressive is the movie they managed to create despite all those obstacles. Gil persevered and was able to tell a story about vampire whores. A lot of people climb Mount Everest and they never make it back down, but Gil Adler has. I think a director disliking his own movies, I don't know if that makes them bad. We're all our own worst critics. We always will be harder on what we create than others will be because we're too close to it and we see the seams more than others do. Alfred Hitchcock famously criticized his own film Rope, saying it was nonsensical and unreal, and yet it's revered as one of his greatest thrillers. Steven Spielberg said Temple of Doom was too dark and too horrific. David Fincher has said no one hates Alien 3 more than him. And yet, despite those criticisms, not one of those films is bad. Alien 3 was found not guilty in this very courtroom. So let's take directors' opinions on their own films just with a little bit of grain of salt. Like, as I would quickly dismiss a director's word if he tells me his movie is perfect, I'm also going to kind of dismiss their word if they tell me it's rubbish too.
Thank you, Mr. Maynard. Do you have any further exhibits, Mr. Stein?
Yes, I would like to submit all 10 episodes of Alan Katz, who wrote and produced the movie, all 10 episodes of his podcast about the making of Bordello of Blood, titled the How Not to Make a Movie podcast.
Do you have that in Cliff Notes form for us over here?
I have an excerpt I'd like to read from the first episode.
Very well.
He said, Bordello of Blood was never meant to be in the first place. We made this movie that literally no one wanted to make. It is an object lesson of what happens when you do things for all the wrong reasons. And I'll let the other almost 10 hours of podcast speak for itself.
Okay. Mr. Maynard, do you have a specific rebuttal to that point?
Well, it does seem obvious that the people who made this film really didn't want to make it. And obviously they're brought in to work on another project. They're working on Dead Easy, which I heard was a ghost movie. I've read it was a zombie movie too, set in New Orleans. The reason that project got scrapped is producers felt that the scripts were too horror and not enough comedy. They recognize that Tales from the Crypt has a large component of humor in it. It's lighthearted, and they wanted to go in that more lighthearted direction, which I think especially makes sense if you're planning a trilogy, to have your second beat kind of be like a breath of fresh air, something lighthearted and not as dark. And I'm sure that the people who were brought in to do the first project, who were gung-ho about doing a very horrific story, probably didn't appreciate just getting shuffled over onto another project. Maybe the producers should have just looked at bringing on a whole new crew.
Okay. Mr. Stein, do you have any further exhibits? We know about the budget and the time and the execution of it. Are there any like plot points that don't add up?
Oh, yes. I now that we've established the hardships of making this movie, we all know that it is possible for difficult circumstances to create a quality finished product, as the defendant has suggested. But let's look at the movie itself. Dennis Miller gives very little effort to this performance. He is essentially playing a version of himself who, instead of possibly reading off of cue cards, is just ad-libbing at will to the dismay of the crew. Angie Everhart seems to be putting in effort, but her acting skills are limited when it comes to playing the big heavy in the movie. As for Corey Feldman, at least he's chomping the scenery, literally and figuratively. The effects are so-so. The best sequence owes its success to the use of ballroom blitz.
Yes, agreed.
And according to Kim Kondrashoff, who plays Jenkins the biker, he characterized his performance based off the cat that he used to own that was crazy and antisocial.
We find inspiration in odd places, Your Honor.
Yes, anyone watching this performance can say not good. None of these performances are good. None of the effects are particularly good or creative. And again, there's but one fun sequence with the requisite nudity and gore, but one sequence does not make for a whole movie.
Okay, Mr. Maynard, what say you about this performance?
Well, let's start at the top. There's a lot covered there to respond to. That's a lot. So I may save some of that for my own exhibits. But let's start with kind of the elephant in the room, Dennis Miller. He's kind of the tipping point for this movie. If you enjoy Dennis Miller's sardonic sort of delivery, he's going to carry you through this whole movie with no problem. If you don't like him, though, you're kind of fucked. But if he's not to your personal taste, that doesn't really make his performance bad. He is believable as a wisecracking, unlicensed private detective who is dropped into a situation well over his head. He meets the brief. He just kind of chuckles and laughs along at the situation for being as ridiculous as it is. It is a comedy. Maybe he's not everyone's flavor, but neither is Pauly Shore. So I'd suggest those people not watch.
You are not defending yourself well, Mr. Maynard.
Actually doing a great job, but I get a really biased judge every time. Like I'm saying, Pauly
Shore, are you kidding? You're equating him to Pauly Shore?
Pauly Shore may not be your flavor, and that's why I recommend you not see Pauly Shore movies. But Pauly Shore has made plenty of successful films.
All right, show of hands in the jury. Who's a Pauly Shore fan? Mr. Slender?
Son-in-Law, Encino Man, Biodome, classics, 90s classics. He's the 90s Marlon Brando. Now, I found Dennis Miller to be very likable in this movie. He does smirk along with us in the audience, but he kind of keeps his Millerisms to a minimum. He doesn't use a lot of $4 words. He seems like he's just kind of down to hang out and have a good time. And as was mentioned, I'm not here to defend Dennis Miller's behavior on set. Luckily, that's not my job. I don't know if we're not here to determine if Dennis Miller is an asshole. He's not on
he
trial.
Might be. No.
Exactly. But despite the fact that I think he did not want to make this movie, which is why he asked for a ridiculous price tag. HBO, he was doing Dennis Miller live on HBO. They must have thought it was a good cross promotion. They really thought he was right for that role because the character is written as sarcastic and chuckling through most of the role, that Dennis Miller would be the right timbre for it. So, they paid him what ridiculous amount he asked for, and he was like, well, I'll show up when I want to, and I'm going to have a lot of fun. And I think he does, and I think it comes through the screen. I think he's having a blast.
Mr. Stein, do you have any further exhibits?
If I may rebut the Dennis Miller comments that this is a Tales from the Crypt movie first, and possibly Dennis Miller vehicle second.
Okay.
Well, I'd reply to that. Comedy is a core element of Tales from the Crypt. Several episodes took themselves way less seriously than others. There's The Ventriloquist Dummy with Bobcat Goldthwait and Don Rickles. There's Death of Some Salesman with Tim Curry and Ed Begley Jr. And then we have the host of the frickin' show, the Crypt Keeper himself, who's wisecracking and making puns for the first 2 or 3 minutes of every single episode. Comedy is a crucial element to this franchise. Tales from the Crypt is the show that kind of taught a young me that horror can be funny and cheeky. It doesn't have to be blood-curdling. You can have a good time with it. It doesn't have to give you nightmares. It can be fun.
And I fully agree that Tales from the Crypt is a comedy first and probably horror second. My point being is that it's usually the star doesn't usually overshadow the production.
Question from the bench, and whoever knows this can answer this, because I haven't seen Tales of the Crypt. How is this a good representation of that show?
No,
I don't think it really is either. But a feature is. This could have been drilled down into the half hour that was Tales from the Crypt, and it would be one of their more wonky outland. They have episodes that are like that. They have like the Reluctant Vampire. I think is one. And so there's things that would fit in, but that's not always the tenor of the entire show.
And to be fair, Demon Knight, the far superior Tales from the Crypt movie, isn't really a Tales from the Crypt episode either. And I think for the movies, they were just kind of give carte blanche to go big.
I think the success of the show made them just think they could slap it onto a few random horror scripts and try to pump out some views. And in the very least, they could replay them on HBO later.
Makes sense from a fiscal perspective, I suppose. Mr. Stein, did you have any further exhibits, sir?
No, I rest.
All right. The prosecution is rested. Mr. Bangs or Mr. Scaretaker, who is much prettier, you may present your first exhibit.
Actually, no, the Scaretaker had to go visit his scarapist for a bit. I know, thank you. I want to talk about a couple of the other characters that got briefly mentioned, who I think do fairly well in this film. This film contains several stars from other great vampire films, which makes for a couple of good Easter eggs. Chris Sarandon, who I think is maybe the best single performance in this movie. He famously played the vampire Jerry Dandridge in 1985's Fright Night. He now gets to swap roles and be sort of the vampire slayer, though his character is more checkered than that. He plays Reverend J.C. Current, who we discover has actually enlisted the help of the vampire brothel to eliminate sinners in his town. It's a bit of a trope, the religious man who's actually corrupt and sinful himself. But in a nice twist on that, we actually find that he is earnest in his convictions, as he's willing to sacrifice himself, trying to eliminate as many of the vampiresses as he can, before Lilith finally kills him. He's a great supporting character in this film. And similarly, Corey Feldman was mentioned. He played a vampire hunter in the Lost Boys franchise, right? Now he's featured in this film as a brothel patron who gets bitten and becomes a vampire himself. So again, it's a switcheroo, and he gets to ham up his role admirably.
Okay, Mr. Stein, do you have any comments on the supporting cast in this film?
No, I will actually support the comment that Chris Sarandon is by far the best performance.
Okay, you're ahead by one, Mr. Maynard. Keep it going. What else do you have?
But my comments on Corey Feldman's over-the-top performance still remain.
Yeah, but it's right for the tenor of this film. This film is not a drama; it's a B-movie horror comedy. And the horror part, I'd say more is so much the splatter, right? It's about gore and effects. It's not really supposed to be scary, but a lot of Tales from the Crypts aren't scary. I don't think a lot of vampire movies are scary in general. Vampires don't really scare me,
not to any extent.
But it's more about the. Not to a certain extent, but it's more about the splatter and the gore. And I also want to speak up for one Angie Everhart, who plays Lilith. Now, Angie was a supermodel who prior to this had a minor role in Last Action Hero, but she's essentially an inexperienced actress. And she apparently only got the part of Lilith because Sylvester Stallone, who she was dating at the time, pressured producer Joel Silver into hiring her. Though Silver is quoted as saying supermodel actresses were the next big thing. And if you kind of look at where things do, that's kind of right. But honestly, for as little experience as she's supposed to have, she does a very commendable job in this film as Lilith. Not that the role is particularly demanding. She mainly only needs to be seductive and self-assured, but she nails them both convincingly. Like, she's hot and she's kind of evil, and you think of her as very capable. And if I hadn't read on IMDb trivia that she was an untrained actress, I don't think I would have known. Also, I love the cameo of William Sadler as the mummy in the beginning. It's basically a total reprisal of him as the Grim Reaper from an episode of the TV series. And they do the exact same thing with the cutting off the hands. It's practically the exact same gimmick. But he couldn't be the Grim Reaper, I think, because he was deaf in Bill and Ted's Bogus Journey. So I'm sure there was some legal complications with him being the Grim Reaper in the movie. And that's why we keep our characters intellectually distinct.
Supermodel Prosecutor, what say you on Lilith?
Again, I give her credit for the performance she gives with what the circumstances she had. I still think it's underwhelming, and maybe, again, it's being when compared to Billy Zane in Demon Knight, which is a completely underrated, iconic performance.
As are all of Billy Zane's performances.
Well, as all of his performances. Again, and that's not a knock on her per se, but again, being forced to cast probably one of the second most important role in your movie with someone based on who she's dating is a disservice.
Hollywood casting is a lot of politics behind the scenes. You know, we'd be surprised if we found out how much of that casting is a lot of elbow rubbing that we don't know. I agree. In a lot of movies. The final point I want to touch on too is
hold on.
Go ahead.
If I may touch on the William Sadler cameo. Again, I'm a huge William Sadler fan. Of talking to him.
He's also in Demon Knight.
Yes, he's also Demon Knight. I've talked to him on many occasions. Very nice guy. But that scene again, the fact that they didn't even bother rewriting a new scene, they just reused the one, shows the lack of ingenuity and imagination in this movie.
Okay, Mr. Maynard, what was your final?
I do wish they had given him new stuff. I'm not sure why they exactly kept the same thing, but so the start of this film, as it was mentioned, it was a script by Robert Zemeckis and Bob Gale of Back to the Future fame in 1973 to make an exploitation film about a whorehouse full of vampires. I think that's very admirable. I think we can all see the appeal in that. Obviously, it got put on the back burner for a long time, but it seems like an obvious choice if you're looking to make a Tales from the Crypt film franchise, and you need stories. Now, at the time, it wasn't received well by critics. It's obviously gotten a big cult following. And if you look at some of these complaints from critics, they seem rather silly. You know, a lot of critics complained that it was too gory and smutty.
What?
Some cherry-picked quotes from reviews describe it as only a bath of blood and bare skin.
Stupid critics.
Another said, triple the length of its cable television inspiration, triple the gore, triple the naked women. That was one of the negative reviews.
That sounds like a positive to me. Yeah, I'm confused as well.
Yeah.
Another reviewer gave it 1 out of 5 stars, calling it The Dennis Miller Show with naked vampire vixens. Do these guys know they're supposed to say bad things about the movie? It's called Bordello of Blood. What exactly did you think you were going to see? A quaint coming-of-age story about 2 talking kittens who have to find their way home? I'll watch that too. But Bordello of Blood, it's in the title. It promises gore and sex, and I feel both were delivered adequately. Plus, Leonard Maltin, he called the film fitfully amusing juvenile horror comedy. And I call that's a great review on it. I think the practical effects, they do deliver here. The budget was cut horribly to pay for Dennis Miller. I would have liked to see what they could have done with their full budget. But, you know, the scenes where Tamara, like she's the vampire disguised as the nurse in Whoopi Goldberg's hospital room. You heard that right, folks. When the sun comes in through the window and burns a hole in her back and her skin bubbles and gives way, that was great. Corey Feldman getting a hole shot in his chest with the super soaker full of holy water. That's ironic since he used the same weapon in The Lost Boys. And those effects are strong. And my favorite one is during the aforementioned ballroom blitz scene. Definitely my favorite in the whole film. You know, there's the vampire whore who gets squirted in the face and her skin starts melting off while she screams. Probably my favorite bit there.
Okay, yeah, I'm confused. Like, did this screen at Cannes Film Festival? How did all these critics see it? Mr. Stein, what do you think about this? Is meant to be a comedy. It's aware of itself. What do you think of this serious reception?
Yeah, I mean, I can't speak for the taste of the critical elites from 1996. It may be trying to be a horror comedy, but it forgot to bring horror or comedy.
Like I said, I do think the horror comes from kind of the splatter and just the genre trope of vampires in general. Comedy, I think, is subjective. I watched most of this movie with a smirk on my face. Again, I like Dennis Miller. I also like Pauly Shore. I also like Ernest. So sue me.
Oh, we will,
You know,
Mr.
but
Maynard.
Dennis
This is a
Miller,
court.
Dennis Miller, I thought was a competent leading man. And I sat down with this movie. This was probably the first time I've really sat down to watch it, was for this trial. And I told myself before I sat down, if it's like PG-13 and the bordello is full of like women with their tops on, I couldn't save it. You know, you can't have a film called Bordello of Blood and not show a lot of tits. And while I concede the film should have had even more tits, this was probably the most we could squeeze in without labeling it a soft
Oh,
core
I see what you
porn.
did there.
Thank you. Plus, you know, a film like this, it was certainly made to be played on HBO ad nauseum, where tits and violence rule the roost, and still do, if the first few seasons of Game of Thrones are any indication, right?
Mhm.
I wonder why that show went down in popularity. I wonder why. But I think this film, its life cycle truly began in the VHS rental phase. You know, this is something you put on with your friends, you crack some beers, you share some laughs. I don't think I'd enjoy this in the theaters either. And some movies are better on the smaller and more personal screen. As a side note, this played on Comedy Central all the time. It was probably awful edited for television on Comedy Central.
Oh, I want to see that.
So if we were putting the TV edited version of this film on trial, I'd be with Jason Stein here.
It'd also be 30 minutes long, I think.
Yes, it would be very short. But the fact is, kind of in its raw sort of phase, then I think it's a really fun movie. It is to your personal taste, but if you're entering a movie called Bordello of Blood, you have certain expectations, and they met them.
And you're resting there?
And on that, I rest. I do, sir.
All sides have rested their cases. The attorneys will now present their closing arguments. Jason Stein, you may begin.
In closing, I must admit, there are far worse movies than Bordello of Blood, but it is far from a decent movie. Its biggest sin is mediocrity. One could say it has a certain charm, but it isn't even the best movie about vampire sex workers that was released in 1996. That honor goes to From Dusk Till Dawn. When you consider how meh of a movie this was and the toll it took on its makers, then I can see no other choice than to toss Bordello of Blood into the fiery pits of hell. Thank you, Your Honor.
Cue the organ music. Off-season Hell on Reels.
Oh, man, not again.
Mr. Bangs, you may present your closing argument.
Thank you again, your horror. Well, kiddies, today's case has been a real scream, but it's time for you to get into that deliberation tomb and give us the scary tale ending we so frightfully deserve. It had better not be a guilty verdict, or I'll have a real bone to pick with you. But whatever the outcome, I just hope we have ourselves a hung jury. Sorry, just a bit of gallows humor, my favorite kind. But after all, everyone loves a good joke. Joke. Anyway, it's time for me to make like my good friend John Wayne Bobbitt and cut this bit short. So, until next time, boils and ghouls, this has been your intellectually distinct master of ceremonies, the Scare Taker, saying so long and fangs for the memories.
Members of the jury, Mr. Dylan J. Schlender, Mr. Big Ben Haslar, and Mr. My favorite chronicle of coolness, Ryan Luis Rodriguez. You have all heard the facts concerning this case. It is now up to you to determine this film is guilty of being a bad movie. The bailiff will escort you to the deliberation room to render your verdict. Why didn't we just go to the Bordello of beer instead? Sounds like a much better time.
Agreed. You meet a different kind of bloodsucker there.
Dylan, what are you thinking?
Well, thanks. You know, I went into this movie with incredibly low expectations. You know, like the show itself, Tales from the Crypt, isn't exactly the most polished thing you'll see out there. Even though Arnold Schwarzenegger directed an episode of one, which is really cool. But I gotta say, like, I thought the movie was actually pretty funny. I thought it landed. I don't have a problem with Dennis Miller as the leading man, like he was kind of in the zone. I appreciate what Jason was saying, and I appreciate having the witness on about all the behind the scenes turmoil in this movie, and I feel like that's just something we see a lot in this courtroom when people bring up the behind the scenes stuff. It gives this broad permission structure for people to just really dump on the movie and not like it. We heard these same arguments, like for Star Trek Nemesis or the vampire movie with Nicolas Cage, for example. And I just don't think they really, those arguments really move the needle for me. So what are you thinking, Big Ben?
Yeah, these ones are hard for me to judge because I do tend to think of guilty, not guilty in terms of intentionality. Did they accomplish what they intended to? And in this case, I think that they did, but what they're intending to do is something that I find kind of reprehensible. This is like tasteless by design. Something like Sharknado, like Sharknado accomplished what it attempted to do too, but it's still a bad movie, right? It still knows what it's doing. So that makes it hard for me because this
I'd say it has a little more
that
polish in earnestness than Sharknado does. You know what I mean? Like, I do think you do.
Not the first Sharknado. The first Sharknado is dead serious.
Is it?
But it's terrible.
But no.
Yeah, well, I mean,
no, it is.
But it's aware
It's
of it.
No one
slightly
hires
self-aware.
Ian Ziering seriously.
Yeah, get out.
Hey,
of
what
here.
are you doing in here, mister?
It was the scare taker. Oh, okay. Yeah,
He's allowed.
no, I think like
The
what you
scare
said
taker
when
can
you,
sit down with
This
you.
is my new tomb.
when you look at like the performances, like I know Miller's not everyone's cup of tea. I wouldn't have compared him to Pauly Shore. Yeah, no,
Every time he cracked a pop culture reference, I died a little inside.
I mean,
Fuck this
I mean-
performance. Fuck this performance.
dude, Corey Feldman had a poster for Demon Knight in his room. It was very self-aware. Like they were everyone was doing it.
Yeah, like Dennis Miller saying, I feel like I'm in a bad Tales from the Crypt episode. Meta ass.
Yeah, but the whole movie
God,
was
this
already
movie
meta.
Sucks. This movie fucking sucks. I hope it dies on fire.
Well, it very well might, depending on how this jury goes.
I mean, how dare you make a Tales from the Crypt movie that looks like total garbage? That's one of the greatest looking television shows that's ever been made. And when you bump it up to a movie, it should look twice as good. But it looks a quarter as good. It looks terrible. Thankfully, it's only 86 long minutes long. Oh my God, I wanted this thing to end every single second it went on. Every single time.
Well, was there anything the defender said that swayed you at least a little bit? I'm just curious.
No, not a single thing. Like pointing out that Chris Sarandon played a vampire before. Okay, so he also played Jack Skellington. Does anybody care? No. And as a fire and brimstone televangelist, it's a soft target. It's not exactly great satire. We've done this bit before. The only addition is the super soakers full of holy water, and even that is kind of bumbled in the execution. I hate
Well,
this
hold on a minute, Ryan. I got to push back there because Maynard did point out how the televangelist angle, it would have been very easy to keep him as the flat bad guy, like, LOL, the Christians are all evil. But he actually turned out to be a man of conviction, and he went to right the wrongs he perpetuated by trying to kill the vampires. I thought that was a pretty smart little twist for this movie.
I think you're giving it way too much
I'm
credit.
giving a
for this movie.
No,
the
that's what I'm
bar's
saying.
low.
Like, well, yes, because this is also ultimately a movie about vampires having their boobies out. It's like I just think that's just the level of this movie is at. And I think that was the intention. We're constantly talking about intentionality. I feel bad that maybe some people had a bad time making it. But you do like the concept death of the author. One day, that director's words, if people aren't familiar with him or his background and all they have is the text, or i.e. the movie, they have to judge it based on what they're seeing and not what they're being told.
So do you have a verdict you're locking in there, Mr. Schlender?
Well, I'm not the foreman, so I guess I can lock in early. So I want to say I really respect the fact that we were able to hear from the director. I thought that was great. I appreciate where Jason was coming from, and I totally understand why people may not like this movie. But the case Maynard brought forward, I think there's enough in this movie to get it to not guilty, and to the point where I'd probably watch this movie again happily. So I'm fine saying not guilty.
Ben?
I would not watch this movie again. I do think that for every rule, there is an exception in life. And if we're talking about intentionality, these types of movies are the exception to that rule. This was meant to be bad. It was meant to be tasteless. People who watch this are sort of, thumbing their nose at real movies. Yeah. So yeah, I'm going guilty, like, especially if the director hates it too. I think that also, is a point in its favor for being bad. And the Dusk Till Dawn comparison. Yeah, that is a movie that does this sort of thing right. Dusk Till Dawn takes that tasteless idea, but executes it in an artful way where they're like doing something entirely different for half the movie. And then, we're shifting. Now there's friggin' vampires we have to deal with. So that is an example of how this concept would have been done right. I am going guilty.
And this is around the point where I swerve.
Nope.
But I'm not going to do that because this movie blows. Guilty.
All right.
Now let's go tell that asshole of a judge. I mean, no,
Oh
the
my
very
God.
handsome judge. What did I say? I forgot. I thought Rob was the judge for a second. I'm sorry, Ben.
Mr. Foreman, have you reached a verdict?
We have, Your Honor. In the case of the People versus Bordello of Blood, we thankfully find the defendant guilty of being a bad movie.
The verdict is so rendered. The Bordello of Blood is hereby sentenced to serve time in a horror house of vampires ravished by dames until it has learned its lesson. Well, is this a punishment? Man, court is adjourned.
Me the fuck up. Do you want to send it to hell too, Ben? Pull the trigger.
All right, yeah, send it down. Down it goes.
Oh,
We will go down the hole.
Yep, and there it goes.
That's it. Court's adjourned.
All right. How you guys doing? This is Tugmaster Philly reporting to you outside the Wheels of Justice. Jason Stein, come over here. Tell me, how do you feel about today's verdict?
Oh, I feel great. I mean, really, I didn't really have to do much heavy lifting here. I let the movie and the makers everything speak for itself.
All right. Well, thank you for your time there. That was a good show there. So, here comes Maynard Bangs. Maynard Bangs, come here.
Hey, Tug, how's it going?
Yeah, it's a little rough these days, but we're
It was
all
rough
getting
in there.
by. It was. I like the fact that you had that spooky guy with you there.
Oh yeah, the scare taker.
Yeah, scare taker.
He's a good guy. I think had I won, we probably wouldn't have seen him again. But I think the fact that I lost, he'll probably be hanging around a lot.
Yeah, no, I agree. But so, what do you think about the verdict then?
Well,
you can
Tug,
be honest.
I know you liked this movie.
Yeah.
But I'm not surprised by where the other two jurors landed. It's kind of exactly what I expected. Surprised Ben is so hard on movies with a lot of tits out. There's a place in the world for it. I'm not surprised by the verdict. I do want to congratulate you on your recent appearance on the Jock Doc podcast.
Oh, well, thank you.
I did hear that.
Thank you.
Unless it's not out yet.
No, I think it's out. I think it was
good.
last
Okay.
Tuesday. Yeah.
If not, I'm from the future,
Ooh.
and I heard it, and I knew I was going to lose.
All right. Well, that makes sense then. I just want to say. Oh my heart, jeez.
He's my ride.
He is pretty scary. We can talk about this more in the post-trial analysis. Have a good one. Oh man. Okay, so now everyone has to do their scare taker or crypt taker.
Oh, I already did.
I'm so mad Ben did the voice, but it was pretty good.
I didn't know. I should have
Jason,
figured that you were going to do that. I should have stayed away.
Jason, let's hear it. What do you got?
I decline.
What? How dare you?
So much. I actually was emailing with John Kassir earlier today. Not that to humble brag, but I just can't. I can't even bother doing an impression.
All right, Ryan, let's hear yours.
I refuse.
Wow! Oh my God!
Great content.
If I
just insulting to do a bad Crypt Keeper impression.
Right, which is why I didn't do one. I did a scare taker impression.
No,
No, I like it.
Different
No,
character.
I really
Intellectually
like it.
distinct.
Yeah, because if I could do a Crypt Keeper as good as him, you think I'd be doing this podcast? be off doing something.
He'd be
much
doing
better.
cameos.
But fun trial. Jason, you gotta tell me, is there just a little bit somewhere deep down in the recesses of your soul that has a little bit of a soft spot for this movie?
No, okay. Let me just say this off the top. Everyone has to have a favorite movie. I figured there's got to be someone out there who loves, for every movie that's been made, there's got to be someone who like is obsessed with that movie. So I don't mean to poo-poo on someone else's yum. I'm just more talking on the merit of taste and art. But, you know, as someone who runs a Tales from the Crypt podcast, yes, of course, anything, you know, with related to that property, I have a soft spot for.
Yeah. Now, speaking of, you do run a Tales from the Crypt podcast. It's called Dads from the Crypt.
That is correct. So it's me and two other dads. We are reviewing every episode of Tales from the Crypt, and we give dad advice that is somewhat questionable.
Okay.
We don't take any liability for the what harm it may cause to your children if you follow
That
our
precludes
advice.
the Crypt part, right?
Are you going in chronological order, or are you bouncing around?
No, we're doing chronological order. So we actually took a slight break after season 5 to cover the Cabinet of Curiosities, the new Guillermo del Toro Netflix show, which is also an anthology.
And have you already gotten to You Murderer? Because that's my favorite episode.
No, that's the end of season 6, I believe. So we're just rounding out that the Cabinet of Curiosities, and part of it is because like we're realizing that we're coming around the bend to the end of our material, so we're trying to, you know.
Oh, dude, you've got Tales of the Crypt Keeper if you want to go to the animated show.
Yeah,
if you just want to jump on that, dude, you could do the Twilight Zone.
Yeah,
like
there's a lot
Twilight
of
Zone.
The trick is, yeah, there's a lot of ways we can go. We haven't decided yet, but it's just, you know, going from Tales from the Crypt to, you know, what I don't want to go into something I'm not going to enjoy as much as I have doing Tales from the Crypt. Though it was.
Are You Afraid of the Dark?
Yeah, no, that's
Afraid of the Dark's really good the whole way through. Basically.
Tales from the Dark Side. Yeah, there's all kinds of things.
Yep.
So, yeah, we still got
Creep
time
Show,
to
the new
decide.
Creep Show.
Yeah, we did the new Creep Show.
The new Creep Show is great.
There's a lot of things out there. And, you know, again, we're just kind of enjoying the ride while we can. You know, we've had some really amazing guest appearances and some great stuff we've been affiliated with. And I don't know if you mentioned, we talked a bit about the unmade movie Dead Easy. We actually did a table read of the Dead Easy script back in December. And
awesome.
Gil and I worked on it with Gil and Alan, and they used their old casting director. So we had Sean Astin, Rudy himself, Samwise Gamgee,
Sweet,
was the star. We had what's his name, Jake Busey. We had Tia Carrera. We had a bunch of, you know, professional actors and actresses doing it. We did a benefit for that. So
yeah. Well, Google. Everyone should Google then Dads from the Crypt Dead Easy episode, because that sounds like a really cool table read. That sounds like a really unique presentation.
Hopefully by the time this comes out, we'll be putting it, or at least Alan will be putting it on his Patreon so people can review it or watch it again. I mean, reviewing it again. Give him a follow as well at the How Not to Make a Movie podcast.
Yeah, absolutely. And you should have Ryan on to talk about the episode he wanted to talk about.
Yeah, definitely. Hit me up.
I know I'll be on soon, and maybe I'll bring Schlenzo with me.
Hey, all right.
And hopefully we'll know the topic before then. But I mean, I can watch any episode of that anytime. Too bad I missed Death of Some Salesman. That's the one I
that was a really good one. And
did you do the Arnold Schwarzenegger episode yet?
Yeah, that's season 2. That's actually a very early one.
Okay.
The Death
I love Arnie.
Death of Some Salesman was actually directed by Gil Adler. So that's one of his like earliest directing.
See, he loves comedy.
I don't say he does.
Gil.
And
Gil and me, we're like this.
Yeah.
We get each other. But
and we actually did a episode about. I did a quick interview with him about that specific episode. So if that's your favorite episode, go look for that on our pod feed.
Absolutely, we will. Anything else you're working on that?
Nothing that I can talk about at the moment. We got a couple things. I'm always
the NDA. Okay,
I know we're always talking. We have ideas of what we're going to do next. Nothing to a point where it's like, oh, I want to. It's not at a baked point where I can talk about it. But I
Excellent.
want to commend you.
We're going to have you back anyway. We've already talked about some other things you want to do that I was excited about. So
Yeah, but
we'll be sure to have you back.
Yeah,
Hopefully
totally.
those plans will be more concrete.
Yeah, and also I want to congratulate you on a great defense. This is a very hard movie to defend. So
thank you. I actually enjoyed the movie. I like B movies and I like smut. I like Jess Franco. I do. I like Jess Franco, and I like just a lot like Doris Wishman and a lot of those like questionable sort of erotic features that came out in like the 70s and stuff. And I would have liked to see the 1973 version of this, like real exploitation, gritty, something more like From Dusk Till Dawn got to be. But you know, I didn't mind it trying to stick the polish on entirely either. It doesn't get all the way where it needs to be. It leaves some things to be desired, but there's some okay ideas there. But I can live with it being guilty. I'll sleep well at night because I like guilty movies too. So we always ask for recommendations from our guests for movies that you think people should see. So what is a movie you think people should see?
I'll just say Demon Knight. You know, if you put yourself through this movie and you haven't seen Demon Knight, go watch Demon Knight.
That's my reward.
What's your favorite aspect of it?
Billy Zane.
That's one of them. I love the mythology behind that story. That it's just there's so much into that. And I've actually done interviews. I'm again not humble bragging, but this is all things that we've done. I've done interviews with the director Ernest Dickerson, with William Sadler, and with the screenwriters of Demon Knight, and they're just really intelligent guys, and they crafted such an amazing concept that could really, like, in my brain just could go so many places, and I just kind of love that. And I don't know, it's probably one of my favorite movies of all time. So
excellent. Yeah, no, the mythology's cool, and I know the key from Demon Knight comes back up in Bordello of Blood.
Yeah,
as a key plot point.
I didn't want to talk about it, but that kind of pisses me off that they did that. Especially then that they destroy it like offhandedly. I was like, God damn it.
Yeah, they do. But yeah, it is fun to see them trying to make some connective tissue between the others, and I don't think you're humble bragging. You know what they say: if you've got it, haunt it.
It's a scare master.
I know. I told you he's just going to keep popping up because Ryan didn't vote him away, so he's here. Maybe
that wasn't explained to us ahead of time. He may have swerved.
Now, Maynard, do you or the scare taker have a recommendation today?
It's me.
Okay.
You don't want to know what that guy will recommend, but mine's not much better. If this week's film piqued your interest in the erotic horror genre, as I'm sure it did for Tugmaster Philly, then I suggest you look into the oeuvre of one Gene Roland. He literally has like half a dozen very tasteful films about topless lesbian vampires. They're art pieces, Ben. You should really check them out. If you're not sure,
I've seen one.
Yeah, if you're not sure where to start, I suggest you start at the beginning with Roland's La Viole du Vampire from 1968. It's also known as The Rape of the Vampire, but I'm afraid that I'll get a demerit on the Little Bird site. So let's go with the French title, because it sounds a lot classier in French. It was originally a short film, but additional footage was filmed later to extend it to a feature length. The first half tells the story of 4 vampire sisters who live in seclusion because they believe they suffer from vampirism until a group of visitors arrive to disprove their supposed delusions. That's the better part of it. The second half is about a rebellion of vampiric thrall against their undead queen. It feels exactly as tacked on as it is, but it's still debaucherous and beautifully composed. It's probably about as gorgeous as a smutty film can get, as low a bar as that might be. La Viole du Vampire seems like it might be available to stream on Canopy, but in case I'm mistaken, Kino Lorber has a great Blu-ray release that no physical media collection can be complete without. So you should definitely check that out. Big Bun, you were our relatively biased judge. Why don't you give us your recommendation?
What? I was on your side so much more than I wanted to be. I feel attacked, sir. I feel like From Dusk Till Dawn or even The Lost Boys are probably the more on-topic recommendations, and while I do like them both, I just can't say that I love them. So instead, I'm going for one of my all-time favorite vampire movies that has plenty of fun, and that's 1997's Blade, With the exception of the CGI that is thankfully used fairly sparingly, Blade still holds up. You still feel pumped watching the stellar martial arts fights. Its opening scene perfectly sets up the world of modern vampires and the people who hunt them. And Wesley Snipes is so completely into the character that you buy he's been battling vampires his whole life in every scene that he's in. The supporting cast are all great as well. Not a single person in this film feels out of place. There are a lot of films that followed it, like Underworld and The Matrix, that feel like they owe a lot to the directing in Blade. The third act is slightly over the top, I'll grant any critics, but for those cool fights, I think it's more than forgivable. Blade is streaming for free on Tubi, where the ads probably aren't too disruptive for this type of movie, but you can also rent it from your platform of choice.
Thank you, Big Boon. So, Schlenzo, what is your recommendation?
Oh, well, thank you, Maynard. Tonight, I am recommending a small independent horror movie that I recently watched called All Eyes from 2022. It follows a podcaster that is working with an Ohio farmer to hunt a strange monster that is creeping around the farmer's expansive property. The movie has delightful notes of comedy, and the two main actors actually have very good chemistry. But as the movie progresses, I have to confess I was a bit disappointed in some of the choices that were made. But on the whole, this one scratches that low-budget horror itch that we all love. Find it streaming or streaming on Amazon Prime or my service du jour, Tubi.
Tubi. You're always pushing for Tubi.
I love Tubi. It's
They're paying
fantastic.
me.
No, actually, I'm paying them.
Yeah, you're paying them.
Ryan,
Yes.
send us on home. What's your recommendation?
My recommendation this week is a horror movie, at least more straightforwardly than Bordello of Blood, and it's a recent release called Sick. Ever since the pandemic started, we've been getting films that seem to eerily channel the COVID age without being literal, because who could have predicted it? But Sick is actually a COVID slasher, setting its terrors in the early days of the pandemic and having it dictate the situation in ways that I shall not spoil. Written by Scream screenwriter Kevin Williamson and directed by direct-to-video auteur John Hyams, this is 83 minutes that might hit a little close to home, but it's worth it. Sick is currently streaming on Peacock.
Another week of Ryan being high on Hyams.
High on Hyams. He can't he can't get rid of it. But that recommendation was sick. It was sick.
If I may second that, that is actually a really good movie. I wrote a review of it for Bloody Good Horror, where our podcast kind of spun off from. So
cool.
They do lots of good reviews. Great long. They've been around for like 15 years now, so it's a good long-term podcast to check out.
Awesome. Yeah, no, we should check out that podcast. What about Sick did you like?
Again, it's Kevin Williamson, so the writing was good. It was kind of a 90s throwback, and again, 83 minutes is chef's kiss.
I agree. Keep them short ass movies. I live for them. And Kevin Williamson, he can do no wrong. We all saw We Know What You Did Last Summer. We can all agree.
Hey, what about Teaching Mrs. Tingle?
Exactly. Yeah, you're on the trolley. No, but very excellent choices. And with that, we are all out of show, but we want to thank our guest, Jason Stein, for joining us. Thank you so much, Jason.
Oh, it was a pleasure. Thank you for having me on.
We would love to have you back again in the future. Maybe we'll have some of the other dads from the crypt in as well. And just a reminder to everyone that Jason Stein is it's Jason Stein's monster. That is the monster. Dr. Jason Stein is the creator. So keep that in mind. But we hope to have you on again as well, even after that joke. Even I thought that joke was dead in the water. And we hope everyone else will join us again as well as the reels of justice keep turning.
Count it.
Ryan.
I got nothing.
Ryan!
You could have done your scare taker impression.
Could have done the scare taker.
Please follow us on Twitter at Reels of Justice, Instagram Reels of Justice, and Facebook.com/Reels of Justice.